We are fortunate today to have a presentation by one of our Carr Fellows and a guest that she has invited. The Tawhid Foundation in Lebanon sponsors a fellow from Iraq and a fellow from Lebanon here each year, starting last year. And our fellow from Lebanon this year is Rima Merhi, and she has planned this event, and I will let her introduce our guest and tell you a little bit more about the event.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today to hear a talk about the Druze faith and their challenge of survival in modern times. Welcome, Dr. Obeid. It's really a privilege and honor to have you with us at the Kennedy School this morning. Dr. Obeid has a very distinguished bio, which would be very difficult to run through quickly. But I think what really stands out in his bio is just the number of diverse things that he has managed to excel in. By profession, Dr. Obeid is a clinical professor of medicine at the Upstate Medical University and director of echocardiography at Cruz Hospital in Syracuse, New York. Dr. Obeid has also been a very active member in the American Druze Society here in the States. He has served as a past chairman, and he's the founding director of the American Druze Foundation. And he has won Man of the Year award for his contribution to the American Druze Society. In July 2006, Dr. Obeid also published a book called The Druze and Their Faith in Tawhid. Now, he has won so many awards. I will just list a few. In 1973, his first award was Teacher of the Year. Dr. Obeid has also been given the American University of Beirut Alumni Service Award in 1993, the Arab American Medical Association Award in 1999, Distinguished Service Award by Cruz Hospital Auxiliary in 2003, and many, many others, including a Lifetime Achievement Award at Cruz Hospital in 2009. This was the latest. Dr. Obeid has also written a book in Arabic, on a poetry book, and I believe you mentioned this afternoon also that you had written something on echocardiography. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to you, Dr. Obeid. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you, Dr. Clemens. I wish to express my appreciation for this privilege to be here among you and share with you some aspects of a fascinating community in the Middle East known as the Druze community, Middle East and worldwide now. To start with, I am not this is not my field, and I am not addressing this as a scholar, nor is this my primary interest. As you have seen, I have many interests, but I'm a master of none, so we'll leave it at that. However, what I am going to share with you is my own personal interpretation and my own the result of my own investigation into this in a community and in a faith that I grew up with, and that is part of me, even though there are many circles of identity that one at my age carries, especially living in multiple environments. So what I'm going to share with you now is sort of a broad overview of the Druze, what they are about, how did they come to be, and what do they believe in, how do they fit in the kaleidoscope of Middle Eastern shifting sands and shifting boundaries, and how about the Druze outside the Middle East? What do they face, and how are they addressing some of these issues? And then I'll show you a couple of pictures at the end, if we have time. Now, please feel free to interrupt or comment or whatever. This is a very informal type presentation. So when we're talking about the lands of origin of the Druze, this is Turkey here. That's the Eastern Mediterranean, and I'm sure you're familiar with this map. This is Lebanon, and this is Israel, Palestine, and this is Jordan and Syria. And the Druze originally were in this sort of area here, and in some areas near Aleppo, in a place called Jabal al-Samma, and later south of Damascus, in an area known now as Jabal al-Arab or Jabal al-Druze, and in the Upper Galilee area. This is where it all began about 1,000 years ago. The actual origin is from Cairo, but there are no Druze left, to my knowledge, in Egypt at all. The population did not take roots here, but went up there. So, where does the name come from? So the population, I'm sorry, it's mostly in the southern range of mountains in Lebanon, in Beirut, Shuf, Al-Gharb, Matan, those who know the geography of Lebanon. These are all small areas, but it's very rugged mountainous area where they were able to strike roots and survive. In Syria, as I mentioned, Israel, Palestine, there's about 110,000 now. Jordan, 20, Golan, and then nobody knows the exact number to the west. It's estimated at 150,000, but we don't know because many of the earlier immigrants sort of converted to other faiths, and their children and grandchildren, some of them stayed within the heritage, some of them fragmented into the top. Where does the name come from? The Druze don't like this name because the appellation is after a renegade to the Druze named one of the early founders, if you wish, but there was a lot of rivalry at the time, and he was found to be a renegade and was discredited, and eventually he was killed. His name is Darazi, Mashtakin al-Darazi. There may be some other reasons. There were other theories about the name, like Druze from Daraza, which means to sow and stuff like that. But most likely it is related to Darazi, who is, as I said, a renegade. They prefer to be called Muwahidun. This is I'm sorry, this thing jumps. Okay. Muwahidun are those roughly who believe in the oneness of God as the only one and only God, and the oneness of the creation in God. In other words, it's a unism, if you wish, or oneness, unitary. Some people liken it to the word yoga, and so forth. Although, by definition, having one God makes you a monotheist, the Druze actually are probably more like pantheists because they have a broader vision of what God is about. They don't envision God only as a human figure or in a human sort of representation, somebody up there, out there. God is here, there, everywhere, in all of us, and in every aspect of existence. According to the Druze, spiritual growth takes place in cycles. They are very cyclically. Time is not a straight line in the Druze vision. It is cyclical, but not cyclical within circles. It's more like a spiral, with each stage pushing the level of spirituality higher and higher. And each stage supersedes the other and builds on it, if you wish. They also derive a lot from philosophy, mysticism, reason, the Oriental philosophies, and so forth. So they include, besides the divine revelations in the monotheistic faith, aspects that go beyond that, from ancient Egypt to Persia, Mesopotamia, India, and above all, the Greek philosophies. The latest version of the cyclical events happened in Egypt at the time of the 6th Fatimide caliph and imam al-Hakim al-Awli. And so in that, they emerged from the Ismaili Shiism, and I hear that you had a sort of presentation on the Shia some time ago, and I won't go into that, but anyway, the Shia broke into two main divisions: the Twelvers, who believed in that line, and the Ismailis, who eventually the Druze came from. The Druze evolved a doctrine of their own, so much so that many people among the Druze community feel that this has become almost a separate, independent religion, and some feel that it is still within the main front of Islam. There is a lot of debate on this issue. So this is the tree of the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, starting with Al-Mahdi, Al-Qa'im, Al-Mansur, Al-Mu'azz. Al-Mu'azz, I'm sorry, Al-Mu'azz is credited with laying the foundation for the modern city of Cairo. Actually, the name, Qahir al-Mu'azziyya, related to the Mu'azz. Then Al-Aziz, and then Al-Hakim. Al-Hakim was 11 years old upon succession to the caliphate and imamate, and this is where the Druze hitched their wagon to. And then after him came Al-Zahir, presumably his son, and heir apparent to the caliphate, but in the Druze not to the imamate. And this created a big rift, and Al-Zahir went on to persecute the Druze, the Muwahhidun. So the Fatimid rule in Egypt was a minority rule. And minority rules can survive in one of two ways, either by brute force, as we have seen in some cases in modern times, or by being very open-minded and pluralistic. And this is what the Fatimids did. They were highly educated, many of them were poets, some were scientists, and they built their realm on tolerance, and they kept the bulk of the population maintained their own traditions, their own laws, and so forth, and the Fatimids had their own. And they involved many minorities. Yes?
Minority in the sense the majority of the population were Sunnis?
Yes. Yes. And there were, of course, Copts and Jews, but the majority were Sunnis. But the area was anything but stable. They had a lot of threats from North Africa and from other uprisings, but the main threats were the Abbasids to the east and north, and the Byzantines to the north. There were always confrontations and shifting alliances and so forth. And Syria was the Gordian knot, because Syria had, the population in Syria, there was no majority there of any kind, and Syria would shift back and forth, and it presented a big challenge to all those who attempted to rule it. And this perhaps helped the Druze get a foothold. So then again, some other things that happened in the era of the Fatimids, particularly Al-Hakim, monogamy was instituted as the law for the followers of that sect. They did not impose it on others. He also abolished slavery, and he established gender equality in personal rights, divorce, marriage, etc. is with the consent of both, and upon divorce, although it's not applied now because of the atmosphere of the East, but in the Druze writings it's stated clearly that upon divorce, whoever is wrong will forfeit half of his or her belonging to the spouse. The will is in effect in the Druze laws. Among the Shia, I think the will prevails also, but I think among the Sunnis, you have to go by the Sharia which divides the will into the estate into according to the laws established long time ago. Now the call to Tawhid, which is that specific version of the Ismaili branch, was based on the experience of the Ismailis, network building. I mean, for many, many years or decades, the Ismailis had worked more or less in secret away from the public eye because they were harassed and persecuted. And the Druze call it Dawr al-Satr, the era of occultation would emerge. But they learned how to do to network and establish lines of communication. They have also experience with dissimulation and secrecy. In Arabic, the word would be taqiyya, means take cover in the atmosphere that you're in, regardless of your inner beliefs. So you can believe what you want, but at least outwardly you merge with your environment. And also they got the cyclical paradigm from the Ismailis, and they also got the pyramidal hierarchy organization of the dawah. It was very well organized with the da'i on top, and then lieutenants and sub-lieutenants and so on. Ma'dun, Mukasir, ila akhirih. Okay, so the call was launched in Cairo in 1017. And a year later, about a year later, it was suspended. Apparently there was some confusion or some power struggle or whatever reason, we do not know. It was suspended and reorganized and came back a year later. But however, after that, Al-Hakim disappeared in 1021. So 1017 to 1021 is 4 years. And then Al-Hakim disappeared. And upon his disappearance, things went haywire. I will go into the other details in a minute, but and persecution started by his son. Then there was a period of reprieve where when persecution started, again it was suspended, then came back intermittently. Finally, came back in 1027 and then 1037 for another 6 years. And in 1043, the call was suspended. The last of the lieutenants of Tawhid retired from public view, and from then on, the sect became closed upon itself. It can only be Druze by birth. There were no converts. There's no conversion to Druzism, at least not officially. I'm pretty sure this happened through intermarriages and so forth during the early years until it was sort of, the tradition became set. And then, of course, the practice of the Tawhid. Now, persecution was primarily related to the discontinuation of the imamates. In the Ismaili vision, the bloodline of Ali from through Al-Hussein, Hassan Hussein, etc., continues ad infinitum. The Aga Khan is one of the recent. The Druze stopped the imamate at the Al-Hakim. They accepted the caliphate for his son, but not the imamate, because by then the imamate was handed over to the lieutenants of the faith, and I will put their names shortly. Al-Zahir and presumably Al-Hakim's sister also were instrumental in launching a bloody persecution for 6 years. This is presumably what happened until Al-Zahir stopped the persecution, and then later he died, and after that the persecution stopped. Maybe the tenets of the faith went a little too far, even for Ismaili theologians, and some were accused of ghulu, which is, going too far. And then, of course, the power struggle in the court of rulers, that's paramount in every age. The framework of the Druze call to Tawhid goes on the assumption that if you take the literal meaning of the divine message, if you interpret it verbatim, you are thinking in a straight line. And they call that tanzil, the zahir, the outward, the exoteric. If you add some more interpretations to the meaning and acquire another dimension, this becomes batin or ta'wil, and we can liken this to a two-dimensional projection. And then finally you go to the seeking the essence within the inner meaning, or batin al-batin, and that's Tawheed, and you can consider that in the three-dimensional context. That's how they're thinking of this. And so they looked at the basic tenets. If we look at what they believe in, there is the concept of God. God in the absolute sense is lahut, indescribable, indefinable, and absolutely beyond human adjectives and grasp. We know that the Quran gives 99 adjectives for God. The Druze say these are adjectives that point to God but not of God, because God cannot be defined by adjectives. However, God is present in all of creation, so He's immanent in everything that goes around. And so to make it, to sort of get beyond this paradox of the unknown and the unknowable yet present, they believe that God revealed of Himself in certain ways in human reflections called nasut, and that happened through a process called tajalli or epiphany. And the last such epiphany, they believe, occurred in al-Hakim. So God then is both transcendent and immanent, and totally, in the absolute sense, beyond human reach. The creation in the Druze concept is through emanation from God's conscience. This is along the lines of the Greek philosophers, particularly Plotinus, and to a certain extent Philo of Alexandria. So God emanated from His own conscious an idea, and the first and foremost of this is the universal mind, al-aql kulli. So mind is the first of God's emanations, followed by the universal soul or spirit, nafs, followed by word, al-kalima, or the ambassador of power, and the precedent or right wing or past, and follower left wing or future. All of these concepts took place presumably before or outside the paradigms of space and time. So this is just in the realm of spirit or ideal ideas. And so they are not subject to physical laws and so forth, since they are not, I mean, you can't think of these in space-time coordinates. However, they too have human representations in every age and stage since human awareness. So these five luminaries, if you wish, are present throughout all ages, and they presumably help to guide humanity, sometimes without being seen or known, and sometimes overtly. And they are, this is some of the Greek philosophers who, for example, are supposed to be human representations of the hudud. The word, the sentence that you see in Druze writings is لكل حد في العلو روحاني حد في السفل جسماني. The spiritual and the corporate. Corporate is human beings, the spiritual is outside the realm of space and time. And the human representatives in the era of Al-Hakim were the following names. They're tongue twisters to those who don't know Arabic, but the chief architect is a man by the name of Hamza, who was born the same year as Al-Hakim, and then from Persian descent, and came to Cairo and gradually became the chief architect of the faith. The second in command is Abu Ibrahim Ismail Muhammad, and I'll tell you an anecdote about Abu Ibrahim. The word is this fellow and so forth. The last is very important because he stayed behind and really wrote the bulk of the treaties of the Druze and kept the followers together in times of adversity. Abu Ibrahim was a commander in the Fatimid armies, and most of the Druze don't know that. But however, the Druze call on his name in times of stress, Abu Ibrahim.
That's true.
And during
When you need the power.
but they don't know why. Why is it? And it has confused many people who were during the various bloody struggles in the Middle East. When they hear the Jews calling on Abu Ibrahim, and they say, where is this Abu Ibrahim? Abu Ibrahim is nowhere to be found. He's a mythical figure. He's become a mythical figure. Now, another concept that the Jews believe in is that of reincarnation. And I won't go into all the details of reincarnation because it's a very fascinating subject among psychologists and philosophers and so forth. But it's central in the Druze faith. It's human to human. There is no up or down. If you behave badly, you don't go backward, because if you, as an intelligent, aware human being, did something bad, and now you go back into a mouse, for example, you're not going to learn from this mistake. What happens is you pay for it as a human being. So it's always human to human. The soul is the essence, the body is the vehicle. There is no interruption of life of the soul or the existence of the soul. They are inseparable. The soul does not have an independent existence. It's always connected to a body. And we do not know about gender specificity, for example. Does the soul of a man become a woman or whatever? There are no writings on that. My own bias would be that the fairness dictates that there is reincarnation, so that you're not judged by one lifetime, no matter how good or bad it is. You're judged across the entirety of life. Then it makes more sense for the soul to inhabit multiple bodies and not be gender specific. But again, this is an issue that the Druze avoid discussing. The other thing is, does the Druze always reincarnate in a Druze? The Druze believe that, or most of them. Again, my own take on this would be a little different, and I'm criticized for that, but that's okay. The issue of recall of past lives, which in Arabic is known as nutq. They give you a lot of examples of children who speak a different tongue or who remember details from a past life, and they say, oh yeah, I was so and such a village, and if you don't believe me, you go and look in the wall of the terrace and such, and you will find a ring or something, and they go and find it. Or they go and meet their relatives from past lives. So there are many cases that are reasonably well documented. Of course, there is no theories, as there are plenty of theories, but no specific data on increase of the population of the world and all that sort of thing. The Druze have no, they do refer to something called the Wall of China. They believe that China is somehow connected by as a reservoir of where some pious Druze go after death or come back from there or whatever. But there is a China connection that's somehow intriguing. So Birth and death then are two sides of the same coin in the Druze. If I speak too much, just shut me up. And the self is indestructible. It levels the field for Judgment Day. It provides for evolution and growth. So you are there from the beginning, and you will be there to the end. And I'm reminded by a wonderful essay on this in a book by an oncologist from Australia by the name of Daryl Rennie, who has very, very erudite explanation of how everything is there all the time and everything is interconnected. Reincarnation has had a big impact on Druze behavior, and it offers a partial explanation for why Druze don't fear death. Now this has been a trait of the Druze. Everybody knows that you're not terrified of death. Okay, so the last items on this would be that heaven and hell are defined. There is heaven and hell in a day of judgment, but until then, heaven is on earth, consists of attainment of wisdom, and hell is defined in negative terms, ignorance and degradation. The Druze also had esoteric interpretation of the pillars of Islam, 5 in case of the Sunni, 7 in the Shia. They are all related to, except for the first one, that there is the oneness of God, the others are interpreted allegorically. For example, pilgrimage to Mecca is pilgrimage to God, and you do it esoterically, not exoterically necessarily. The Druze are not proscribed from adhering to the literal pillars of Islam, but it's an option. And it's advisable for those who have not progressed to process the esoteric meaning behind it. And they are enjoined to have 7 traits: truthfulness, care for brethren, the renunciation of idolatry, despotism, assertion of unity of God, and then acceptance and submission to God's will in a concept called ar-rida wa taslim. And not to be passive and lie back and say, you know, God's will, whatever happens, happens. But when something happens, not to go ballistic about it, to say, okay, this is what God ordained, I accept it, and go on from there. So, for obvious reasons, after the persecution, the Druze did not strike roots in Egypt. Responders were more in Greater Syria, and the population there was more eclectic and more diversified than in Egypt. Some of the Arab tribes were dispatched to populate these mountains overlooking the coast to safeguard against the Byzantines and later the Crusades. And the converts were from the local population. Conversion to the Druze faith was not a mass conversion. It was each and every person was made fully aware and joined only when in full control of his physical and mental state. And so there was a certain type of elitism about it, and prominent families who were recruited brought their followers with them, and so forth. There are claims of non-Arab origin of the Druze, such as Crusades or Persians. These are totally bunk. They are purely Arab, and there are lots of documents to that. So the Druze leadership coalesced around tribal aristocracy and based on merit, and the religious class emerged known as the Obeid. And they survived through establishing solid family relations, self-sufficiency, bonding, circumspection, and being in a defendable terrain. And despite the Druze standing with the Muslims in all phases of the struggles against crusades or Turks or whatever. There were numerous fatwas, numerous edicts against them, and some bouts of persecution from the days of the Mamluks all the way down to the last one was in 56 at the hands of Shishakli in Syria, who issued a proclamation that the Druze were renegades and their blood is and of course Shishakli was deposed and later assassinated. I mentioned that. Now, because of their service to the cause of the Arab cause and the Islamic cause, they were rewarded also at different times. The Tanukh clans, for example, the emirs, became rulers of certain areas of Mount Lebanon, and that rule continued for several hundred years. A very notable personality at the time of 1487 is Abdullah Tanukhi, known among the Druze as Sayyid Abdullah. He is revered as just one notch below the luminaries that initiated it. And with him, the religious class became sort of morphed into a group by tradition and not by a strict, not by hierarchy of any kind, not by any written document, but by general consensus. The tradition got established, and to belong to that group, you have to have a deep faith and piety, loyalty, self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is very important, and they also monitored by your peers. And the title is Sheikh. And these people have become sometimes ridiculous in some ways. For example, there is a Sheikh in Obeid who, at the time of, most of them are self-sufficient. They plow their lands and everything. And he had a bumper crop, let's say, during that year, but his mule got sick, and he asked his neighbor if he could borrow the mule to bring the harvest home. And of course the neighbor did. And I asked the Sheikh casually, roughly, what are you talking about? How much? He said, maybe 100 kilos. So he said, fine. So he took the mule, and he went to the field. He weighed the grain. It turned out to be 120 kilos. So he loaded 100 on the mule and carried 20 himself.
Yeah, because it's being very punctual.
Yes, very, and they watch what they say. I mean, they always qualify, if my memory serves me, if I'm not mistaken, and they're sure about something, and say, God knows, maybe it was this way. They don't want to be cornered. So anyway, the Aukan gradually became the custodians of the
Excuse
faith.
me, Dr.
Yes.
And that's related to the first pillar, Sidq al-Lisan.
It
It's
is
related to
related
be honest.
to the first.
Even though the guy is not there,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he's, like we said, self-monitoring himself.
Yes, you cannot even hint at, and also humility. They don't want to brag or whatever. However, the rest of the community who did not join the initiated class became largely ignorant of the faith. And in Arabic they're known as shuhad. This is the secular class, and this is one of the problems that the Druze are facing now, is this separation, if you wish, between the two. So we said that the admittance to the religious class is not necessarily based on scholarship or research or whatever. It is more, and there is no ordination, no church. Yeah. Okay, we talked about that. Now the secular leadership was in traditional feudal families based on merit, and the Tanukh clan was for several hundred years followed by the Man clan, and one very central figure in this is Amir Fakhruddin, this fellow was the first secularist, I would say, in the Middle East. He wanted to establish a secular government in Lebanon and maybe Syria, Palestine, and so forth. And eventually the Turks got rid of him. He established relations with the dukes of Tuscany, and much of the building that we see in Lebanon now is influenced by the Renaissance building from Italy, because he brought with him engineers. After that, it was downhill, because the Mans finished, then the emirate went to the Shihabs. The Shihab clan was largely Sunni. Maybe some were Druze, we don't know, maybe some converted one way or another, but eventually many of them became Maronites. And the chief figure there is Amir Bashir II, who was a very controversial, very powerful man. And from then on, the Druze influence sort of waned. They had a big civil war, not civil war, but a clan war in 1710, during which the defeated party went to Hawran and to Syria and established the rest stayed in Lebanon.
What is the population of the Druze
In
1760?
Well, in Lebanon right now is about maybe 250,000. In Syria,
Oh, no, but I mean in 17.
in 1710,
Yeah.
we don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but probably you're talking of maybe 100,000. Or the Druze at the time. There is a lot of demographic changes. Many of these people, because they were warriors and they fought, they invited a lot of the Maronite farmers and so on to come and till the land and work the land. And gradually these Maronites settled and became more numerous than the Druze, and the Druze attrition themselves.
Thank you.
1860 is a landmark where there was Druze, another type of civil war based on Druze Maronite, but not totally that way, because it was feudal, non-feudal, and the Ottomans played a dirty hand there, and so on. Now, the European rivalry kept the Ottoman Empire standing for at least 100 years. In 1860, it wasn't time to disintegrate, so they kept it until World War I, and the French mandate started, and the Druze leadership. The Druze as a group became second or third tier instead of being in the first tier. In Syria, the orientation of the Druze was more along political and Arabistic lines than Druze lines. In Palestine, the Druze stayed in their villages and adjusted to living in the state of Israel, but they have made major strides recently in education and awareness of their ethnicity. The Civil War, recent Civil War, 75 to 90, had multiple facets with inter and intra-factional conflicts. The major Druze figure there was Kamal Jublad, who was assassinated in 1977. The secular leadership in Lebanon had to work against the tide most of the time, because the Druze have no strategic depth. They don't have any extension anywhere. I mean, the Maronites could rely on France, the Sunnis could rely on the depth of the Arab and Muslim world, the Shia, Iran, Iraq. The Druze didn't have any. During the War of 1860, to spite the French, the British sided with the Druze. They didn't want the French to intervene in that area. Anyway, and internally they did not foster grassroots faith development. They sort of went by tradition. So you grew up in a certain atmosphere, you learned it, you imbibed it, and that's about it. But there are no seminaries, no types of that I know of. Now there is a little more, but in my days there was none. Druze abroad, following 1860, they started migrating, it's trickle and then larger between the wars, and since 48 much more. The early immigrants were peddlers and shopkeepers, and the newer generations are mostly professionals. Much of the early immigrant progeny have melted into the big pot. There is more awareness of ethnicity in the younger groups. The challenges, language, names, family ties, most of them changed their names. They lived in the constant dream of going back home. Meanwhile, they were striking roots, so they were sort of in limbo. They relied on traditions, but these traditions could no longer be relied on to sustain. And the search for identity and heritage was paramount in their minds. And the Druze are an inward-looking community in matters of faith, but outward in general outlook. So there is a contradiction there. And so, and they still have to face the issue of taqiyya, which is no longer useful in the era of informatics, and they have to face globalization. So basically, in some of the things that they face is the question of how much should the secular class be involved in religion, the youth, and how do you teach them the basics of their faith, the difference in outlook on religion between the West and the East. In the East, religion can cause you death. In the West, they may frown at you, but you're free to say what you think. So this is a very, very big subject in terms of evolution and modernization. Then you have mixed marriages across multiple barriers and so forth. And then finally, the Druze have to decide either to partake in change, which is sweeping everything, or be swept by it completely, lock, stock, and barrel. This is the flag, if you wish, of the Druze with the five representing the five luminaries. This is the religious Obeid. This is their attire, or a white sort of thing. Some of them grow beards, and the color of the coat also denotes seniority in a way. This is all informal by acclamation, not by any kind of written procedure, just tradition. This is Sultan Latrash. Almost every Druze home have pictures of these two guys. This one led the Syrian revolt against the French and put the Druze in terms for the West on the map in terms of their bravery. And this man is a big thinker, philosopher, and humanist, and was instrumental in Lebanon, Lebanese and Arab affairs for over 30 years. This is some of the shrines. The Druze don't have many elaborate structures at all, but sometimes they build these things very nondescript sort of, and this is the inside where a sage is buried or something like that, and people go and visit the grave just for, and this is another one. This is, I think, in Palestine. This is the terrain that the Druze take roots in, and you can see why. It's highly defensible, and it's decent soil. You can subsist or exist on farming, and these are some of the villages in the area. This is now, Lebanon is being built at a ferocious rate, so there is no more isolation or anything like that. This is a view from my hometown, and this is a mosque. But not too many people from the Druze go and visit the mosque, unfortunately. This is another view on a hazy day. Dar al-Qamar is there, for those who know the area. And this is where I was born. You can see the architecture is some Arabesque, but also Italian influence. And this is my mother. This is our neighbor whom she raised and became one right-hand thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ali. That was definitely comprehensive and insightful. Just before I leave the floor open for questions, I really wanted to share with the audience why I thought this topic is particularly important at this particular time, particularly from a Druze youth perspective. I think that a lot of Druze youth today are in an identity crisis, if I may call it that. I mean, your presentation leads me to many questions, but I really wanted to focus on the youth perspective. And this identity crisis, I think, has many different dimensions. One of them is religious, and it's, I think, the most important one for a lot of people. We are very proud to be Druze. I mean, there is a sense of pride that our families definitely managed to instill in us. And we're proud for what the religion symbolizes, which is an acceptance of other religions based on reason and rationality, and all the good things that we were raised with. But there is a lot of ignorance. I mean, just the fact Juhal, just the fact that you have a community where more than 95% of that community fall under the category of Juhal is a statement in itself. Now, some of the problems that we face as youth is that we don't really have access to the book. It used to be, it's still a challenge to even get the books of wisdom, the book of wisdom at this day and age. It's getting better, but it's even a challenge to get the book. And worse than that, unlike the Muslims or the Christians who can go to school and read this book and be educated about it, a lot of us, especially expatriates like us who even struggle with basic Arabic language skills, there's no interpretation, there's nobody. And if you go to certain places in Lebanon, for example, like I tried to do and many other youth in my community, so the people who are a lot of the time trying to educate us about our faith, if you corner them a little bit, they will not give you questions, not only in the sheikhs. So you walk away with a sense of even bigger mistrust and greater frustration with the religion and what it stands for. And then there are many other questions, like is this a religion or just a philosophy on life? Because if you go into a regular Druze home in Lebanon, you will see most of them will put up Christmas trees. We will celebrate Ramadan. We will do 100 things, but really, they're missing is a ritual, even on a ritual level. There's a vacuum for a lot of the youth. And I think it's not only religious, even on a social level, Dr. Obeid. The fact that we have been kept in the dark has led to a lot of mistrust from other sects towards us. They wonder, what are we hiding? What is it that for 1,000 years we were not able to reveal? And then, of course, there's other aspects to that which are political in nature. For example, if you say today, I'm a Druze, the first thing people will say, are you Jumblat or Irslan? It's almost as if this identity has been linked to also political figures, which in itself is a problem. And I would like to say this, allow me to say this, that when there was a split between these two political figures, the youth were amazed how they had the authority to even have two different religious leaders. So I don't want to go on a lot about this, but I did want to say that I think it's fair to say that a lot of us have an identity crisis. And what's worse than that is that if you wanted to take a step forward, you're a lot of the time, if you want to reform the state, you said in your presentation, either we will move with modern times or be taken by it. But then this presents another problem and another challenge, which is who are the leaders in this community? Who's our point of reference in order to push for reform, in order to, who's that source that we can go to? And from your experience, from your experience and your knowledge and your interaction with the youth, what do you think, and your vision, what do you think should be our priorities as a community going forward? So if you would shed light on these, I think it would be a good start.
Where do you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
60-part question.
It's not really a question. I
Yes.
just wanted to make sure that we
I know where
communicate
she's
the
coming from.
struggles.
I know exactly where she's coming from. Let me go to the generically first of all. Keeping certain aspects of the faith from total public exposure is not limited to the Druze only. Moses Maimonides, amongst others, said you have to prepare yourself before you receive the full dose. And I think لا تطرحوا جواهركم على الخنازير, don't put your jewels in front of pigs or whatever. So there are admonitions in all faiths to be careful so that you don't misunderstand things. The Druze have taken it to too much of an extreme. Now the thing is that the Druze people grew up traditionally in a close-knit community where security was paramount. So here came the religious leaders or religious class that said, okay, you rely on us, we will keep these books and this information in a sacred trust, and you manage it evolved into that. The secular components relied on a traditional feudal structure. So if it is not Jumblat, it's Arslan, it's not Arslan, it's Ahmed, it's not Talhuq. These were families that have somehow worked themselves into a position of leadership and substituted for and stood in the way of creation of. The Druze were too much preoccupied in protecting themselves and just hiding for cover. Well, now what I'm saying is, and people like me too, is enough of that. Let's try another approach, because that has kept you in the cocoon and has made, from a point of view of faith, it shriveled the community, it impoverished it. It's time to go beyond it. What are we hiding? I mean, there's nothing to hide anyway. Yes, there are some passages in the Druze books that may be, politically oriented or whatever, but these are not revelations from God. These are letters that was written by the Du'at at one time or another, trying to entice people to stick to the faith. So, it's up to you to cull from these what's useful and leave the rest to posterity and build and go to the future. I think any other thing is swimming against the current and dissolution. And I told Sheikh al-Haq when I was in Lebanon, I said, you are being choked in the East and we are disintegrating in the West. So between being choked or
Two opposite
disintegrating.
directions.
No?
Two opposite directions. I mean, we're not opposing, but if we were to go, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
He has to work within certain constraints. I think the individual initiative here is what counts. And individual initiatives, if it coalesces, it creates institution, and institution will survive. The institutions, I forgot who said it, are the long shadows of men or women. So create an institution. And the Druze have not been very good at that.
Shukran. Let's see the
Did I sort of beat around the
We could
bush
have a
here?
debate for an hour, but I really wanted to open the floor.
Dr. Obeid, thank you for a very comprehensive and fascinating presentation. One of your slides implicated to me that the secular part of the community may be just kind of waiting and can be asked to join the religious part, but wouldn't they have drifted to other religions if they were kind of pushed away from the religious community? Wouldn't they naturally gravitate to something else, or are they still waiting?
Many did. Many did. Many prominent families in Lebanon shifted. The Abu Lama,
Ahmed, some the Ahmed, Ailat Ahmed, Ahmed family.
many families have shifted. Al-Masri,
Al-Khazin,
Al-Kha-
Beit Al-Khazin, Beit Abi Lama.
So the Druze have lost a lot of their ranks to. I think the secular class too. I have to point my finger at the secular class, because the secular class enjoyed a free ride. They didn't want to be bothered by religion or whatever. We'll leave it to the sheikhs and we go on our merry way. Well, now they're paying the price too, because the secular class all of a sudden finds itself high and dry. And it's not the fault only of the religious class. The seculars are as much to blame in what's happening in the Druze community, I think.
Just a quick question. Who is a Druze? Now with this, at this time with the intermarriages, now a Druze is the one who is born a Druze. Now back home, definitely they follow the father. While here, you can be anything. So what about the children of a father or mother, in Lebanon, if you're the father, automatically they're Druze. But,
Not for only recently, for many,
no, according to
about
the
20,
government.
50, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, to the government, you are a Druze.
Okay, who decides who's a Druze and not Druze in this country?
It can be anything.
I don't know.
No, according to the Druze.
Druze where?
Here or
Here.
in Lebanon? Because in
Lebanon,
Lebanon,
Palestine.
Here you don't care.
شيخ العقل بلبنان خلينا، ما عندنا شيخ عقل.
Even if there is no Sheikh Aqil,
إيه
but in Lebanon,
إيه.
don't they say something that if you are a Jew,
Lebanon.
your father is a Jew automatically?
In Lebanon, they have accepted children of fathers, Druze fathers, as being Druze. They have not accepted children of Druze mothers as being Druze. It's a paternal, yes, it's a paternal.
Maybe
but
that's
this
the
is
answer.
across all sects,
No.
it's not only
Yes, I
applicable to
know.
the Druze.
I know.
I think it's,
You always
yes.
said
No,
it.
no, it's across all
It's across
sects,
all
so it's
sects.
important. The woman in Lebanon cannot give her
No.
nationality or religion to the kids, it goes
In any
automatically, so it's not only a Druze thing.
But other sects accept conversion.
Yes.
But in
The Druze do
Judaism,
not.
it's the mother that
They
only
accept.
if the mother is Jewish, are you recognized as a Jew? So it's the opposite in Jews.
Is the aqal, is it a hereditary
I'm sorry?
position? Are the aqal, is it hereditary or do people join it? How do they join it?
No, it's not hereditary, but it tends to run in families because of tradition. The way you join it, that's a very good question, is, let's say today, I can't tell you what happened 900 years ago, but even 200 years. The Aqals meet the day for the day for the Druze is like the Muslim, it's Friday, but especially Thursday evening. This is where they meet in a very austere place or at people's homes, very, very simple gatherings, where they share prayers, the Aqals. Now, you come and say, I want to join you. And they will say, come on in, and they will sort of talk generalities and give you all sorts of do's and don'ts in terms of behavior, etc. And they say, come back next week, God willing. And you come back next week, and then now they have people watching how you're doing. If you're cheating or smoking or drinking or carousing or doing any of those fun things.
So you can't be one.
So you don't belong there. And then you have to watch yourself. And they ask you, how do you feel? And you say, I'm a humble servant of God and so forth. And this goes on week after week after week, maybe for a year. And then when they are absolutely sure that you are for real, then they say you can come and يحلم عليك, يعني they will read a passage from the Hikmah to you, and you read with them, and now you're in. Now then, once you're in, you sort of inch your way into the ladder of recognition within the ranks. You may reach a stage where you become almost like a saint. Do that. And the Druze community will accept that. Because if you pass through this rigorous test of the sheikhs, then you have, you're for real. Now, naturally, celibacy is not prescribed in the Druze. You can marry, actually they advise you to marry, but you marry one. Divorce is final, you cannot remarry the same spouse. So the rate of divorce among the Druze is low because they know it's final. And you tend to instill the same spirit in your children. So generally they follow certain families. Did I answer the question?
Thank you. So there's nothing, it sounds like a very simple and rational process. There's no, in a lot of traditions, including Christianity, there has sometimes been a look for a sign or a proof that the person has been chosen for that particular.
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. There is no ritualistic of any kind at all. I mean, there have been some writers have written about the Druze things that are obnoxious, claiming orgies and that kind of thing, which is absolutely untrue. The Druze are highly, highly cognizant and highly self-monitoring about what they do in their personal and public life, and they watch themselves like a dog. Yes.
Let me ask a different question. In Syria, the Druze have been, in theory at least, more assimilated. And in Israel, they have been privileged. And in Lebanon, they have been frozen into a sectarian community, which it doesn't allow for very much evolution, except to how to stay politically alive. And here, there's a community that is freer and is evolving in different sorts of ways. How can you bring this disparate community, which is already small, together and meet these challenges that you're talking about? Because they are so separated. And I'm familiar with the community in Lebanon, and I'm stunned by how frozen they are and how much more of a political community rather than a faith community they have become. All those wonderful traits you listed, I don't know how they pertain to Walid and Blad. I would find that hard to accept. In any case, is there any thought given to this?
By whom?
By Druze that care.
Yes, of course. I mean, if nobody cared, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
So Rima cares. Some members in the community here care.
But is there any attempt to bring together members from these disparate communities?
Yes, you're facing challenge at multiple levels here. You're right. The Druze in Syria, they have not integrated in a religious sense necessarily.
Yeah.
They are integrated in a political sense,
Yes.
because Syria is non-sectarian
In theory.
in theory, politically. In Lebanon is built on sectarian. And the Druze, in one era, the era of Fakhruddin, 300 years ago, there was a hope that the East, that part of the world would become secular and develop along the European lines. It didn't happen. The Druze, by law, you can't be a non-believer in Lebanon.
No.
You don't exist. You have to be one of 15 denominations by law. In Israel, there was there were attempts to sort of segregate the Druze from the rest of the Arab community. I think that has failed. I think the Druze are very much involved with their Arab ethnicity and Israeli citizenship. They're trying to meld the two and live with it. The weakest spot in all of this is the fact that we don't have a community in faith where faith is taught. This is where so that denominator has several gaps in it. And will these gaps be bridged before it's too late? I don't know. I would like it to be traditional, but it is these youngsters who are going to do it, not me.
I'm just talking about these youngsters because I have experience with young Jews here
Yes.
who were very interested. They didn't have the opportunity, like you explained, that they would go to the, watch their father or uncle or whatever, and then go on and want to. They want to, but there's nothing that is at all in their reach. And that was, I'm talking about 20 years and 15 years ago of young people here at Harvard. And when they try to explain to their colleagues who they are or what they believe in, they fall onto Neoplatonistic ideas and explanation of larger philosophical concepts to them. And that's all what they can reach to. There's nothing else open to them. And that's a catastrophe.
Yes, yes. I learned recently that the Australian Druze community have obtained a ruling in Australia that they are a recognized religious community and that they have their own ministers and they're building or developing their own sort of seminary school, if you wish, to graduate these ministers so that they can minister to the rest of the community. This is the first attempt I know of. I just learned about it about 2 weeks ago. In America, there have been attempts to keep the Druze together. Initially, an organization called Bakura, which lasted for about 40 years, and then the American Druze Society came in the 50s, and it now has 18 chapters or 20 chapters, including Boston, where they hold picnics and meetings and so on. Not much faith development, but at least there is about 15, socializing, more or less along all traditional lines, but they're beginning to gradually sort of explore the issue of religiosity and religious education. There is the American Druze Foundation, is now about 15 years old, and there are 2 or 3 other organizations. There are delegates from the Mashayikh al-Aql in Lebanon for performance of rituals like prayer on the dead and weddings, but they are not recognized. I mean, a Druze wedding by a delegate from Sheikh al-Aql here is not recognized by America because they are not registered. The Australians did do that, so this is where they are recognized. There are some organizations in Canada, so it's not all completely lost, but it's hanging in there by the.
And then the other thing is that, let's say, the adults of that generation, the older generation of the youth, are going to churches or mosques or pick up the Quran and say,
Yes.
that's what we do.
Yes.
So there is a big loss for the community, really, in a very
Yes, there is a vacuum.
Yes, I have another question. Lately, I mean, the last 3-4 years or so on, I've heard of delegations going from Israel, Druze, to India to seek their origin, and identifying and actually cooperating and working with religious
Yes.
leaders there. And even citing the examples of Jumblat, that
Yes.
Jumblat had gone to India.
Yes.
Now, is the root in India or in China? When they say, how happy the people of China would be to meet you, when somebody passes away, when they... So,
They beg.
this is a very strange, I mean, I was thinking, God, are they being turned into another proselytizing,
I don't know. India doctrinally is closer because Buddha is considered one of the luminaries, and they of course reincarnation and whatnot. And then there is a group in India called the Bohra, who are very close the Druze, and there may be some crypto-Druze. There were many epistles that were sent to India. So there are probably people who are there who we don't know. There is no networking.
That's it. And on modern times, is there any research, development?
I don't know.
Because that's it. And are they closer to Indian or Tibetan Buddhists?
I don't know.
You see, that's where one would.
They have to have some opinion from scholars on this.
Yeah.
I
Is
haven't
there
come-
any
I
high
haven't come
scholarship
across
being
anything.
done at this age? Isn't?
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about this Indian connection
Yes.
because I know the Boras,
Yes,
the mosque of Al-Hakim,
yes,
Cairo, they totally rebuilt it.
They-
It was ruined and so on.
yes,
And I know some Druze
yes,
who actually, when they go to Cairo, they go and visit
yes,
this, this
Yes.
mosque. And so there's some connection. So I wanted to, so because now the Bora identify themselves as Ismaili,
yes.
And so I'm just wondering whether there is an attempt among the Druze to actually, in searching for their roots, actually to claim themselves as Ismaili Shia, or how, or is it, or do they still see it as very separate?
There is a realization now among the intelligentsia that this is happening. Regrettably, traditionally, the Druze have been so clammed up on this that they did not even explore this possibility. I know that my grandfather, who was a sheikh, an Ismaili scholar from, what's the town near Almira, anyway, and he came and he wanted to sit down and discuss these issues, and my grandfather politely shooed him off. He just, welcomed him, etc., but did not go. So I think there has been a lot of missed opportunities, but we have to look at what's happening now. And what's happening now is that there is a lot of awareness among the Druze youth and demand. They embarrass us sometimes and say, why haven't you done this? We need this. So now I might tell them, it's your time now. I did what I could. And, I don't believe, I believe that spirituality is here to stay. I believe that religions are here to stay. I believe that if every religion or faith brings the best in their tradition to the table, we'll have a much better world. And that no one has a corner on the truth or on knowledge, and if we are humbled by this fact, then we will live happier, and we will be able, each one, to evolve within their own road that they were either born into or they adopted as an adult, whichever way.
I know Khalil Gibran was a Christian, but do you think he was thinking of Druze beliefs in part when he wrote The Prophet? Because it does, of course, feed into this, the idea of cycles.
Yes, I believe Gibran was a pan-religious man. Among other things, he believed in reincarnation. So did Mikhail Naimi. And these people have gone beyond the borders of ritual and formality and gone into the next several layers above the stage where we operate belief. And I think they are certainly are in a more advanced stage of spirituality, no question. Gibran is an icon now.
So what are the prospects for survival as a culture, religion, and a community? What's your view? Next few hundred years, 100 years?
They have beaten the odds many times. The Druze have, it's an amazing story in survival. Any of these pogroms or persecutions could have ended them. But somehow they stay, they survive. The challenges now are of a different nature. Physical bravery is no longer the issue. The issue is how to liberate your mind from a frozen dogma or from traditions that, though they have helped you survive for so long, are now to a certain extent standing in your way. I'm not anti-tradition. I'm against being frozen in a certain position in time because of the chokehold of tradition. So I think that it's a challenge, but I think they will hear. I'm sure they will. I don't know how many, I don't know in what guise, but I think there is too much in this community and in this faith to be thrown away and become extinct.
Dr. Obeid, you say they.
They,
We.
we.
Okay, I was just curious because I think of you as Druze, but when you say they, it makes me think maybe
No,
you.
I work on two different places too. I would like to associate myself with the progressive component of the we. And when I say they, I am talking about the strict dominance, which I think belong to us. I'm sorry.
My turn.
No, yeah.
I wanna thank you, Dr. Obeid, for this seminar, and thank you, Rima, for inviting us. My name is Salim Ayas. For those who don't know me, I'm a member of the Druze community. I've been in Boston for more than 20 years, and Dr. Obeid has been generous to us with his sharing with us the wealth of information and knowledge, and you are truly a champion and a role model, not only to the young professionals in the Druze community, but I feel it's throughout the Boston city of education and the world, and we really thank you.
Thank you.
And we applaud you. And always the great rewards always come from huge sacrifices. May God reward you for that. My question to you, Dr. Obeid, if you don't mind, since we believe in reincarnation, and I do share with you the sense of challenges and what we're going through, given I do come from a similar background like yours, once I had visited you in your house in Syracuse, and I thank you for the visit. Why are you have a fear that the Druze will be wiped out maybe 100 years from now or 200 years? Since we do believe in reincarnation, and I happen to be one of them, I went and I visited my parents from my last generation. Reincarnation, I believe, is the transfer of soul from one body to another. So if we were Druze, say 1,000 people, whatever, or 250,000 in Lebanon, I know that the count adds an increase based on death and birth. But in the overall or the global sense, shouldn't we stay the same? I mean, I'm just kind of, I'd like your, why is there a fear?
Well, it's a concern of an identity that we have grown up with. Ultimately, nothing gets lost. Everything is in flux, and it changes form, or it changes venue, or whatever. So if you are a muwahid, you're going to be a muwahid. And whatever level you are at, and you keep going, and you keep progressing. We're talking of a community, and there are two planes here. There is the plane of Tawhid, which is universal, which has no boundaries, no ethnic or even religious boundaries necessarily in the way traditional religion is defined. And there is the Druze as a community of families and people who have shared a common vision and lived through thick and thin for 1,000 years. And I'd like to see both survive, and the risk is for the Druze, not for the Tawhid. The
Right.
The Druze could, they have, as I said, they have shown that they are adept at surviving for adversities in various forms for 1,000 years. I just would like them to play a role more along the Tawhid lines, in addition to their ethnic and family and traditional lines, because I think they have the capacity to do that, and I think that they can make a positive contribution to the Islamic world in this, because they, minorities tend to provoke reassessment, provoke a little bit of a challenge to think beyond the box a little bit. And I think the East has gone too much to the box, back to the box, and they need to leapfrog a little bit in order to join the rest of the world.
When you met with Sheikh Laqab, what was his reaction? Because I mean, I know from my dad used to tell me, if we lose one man in every year, there'll be no one left on the entire globe for the, whatever the eighth of Earth, 343 million or whatever that is. Or if we add one person every year, there'll be no room in the globe. I mean, the reason I'm asking this, because I am fearing that there is going to be a clash between what we are seeing here and the Majlis al-Madhabi in Lebanon. I just wanted to see have you had a chance to speak with them on that level?
I know many of the members, but I haven't had any formal discussions with them. I did visit Sheikh Laqab and had a nice visit with him. He's a man has more, he has a very sort of pacifying role to keep all the players, and he's a kind man. He's not particularly a scholar in any of these fields. Neither am I, for that matter. But anyway, I think we just couldn't discuss it at that level. As far as the fear is, don't rock the boat because we are in a very vulnerable. I think rocking the boat sometimes is helpful, because it brings out forces that are otherwise dormant. It brings out potentialities that otherwise would not be fulfilled. And life is change. That was a famous president. But life is evolution. If it doesn't evolve, it doesn't exist. There is no existence that doesn't change. So why should we stay stuck in a position that we were there 400 or 500 years ago, 600 years? Amir Sayyid, why? You have to cycle with the times and you have to move, otherwise you stagnate. Rima says so.
She's the moderator. I really have the sense that our Tawhid is very progressive. I agree with you, it changes. It's a dynamic faith. But I'd just like to make one comment, if you don't mind. I won't take that long. As far as religious centers in Lebanon, there are religious centers. We have Khalwat al-Bayada, is like a center of religious that gives doctrines, that gives policies. We have Sheikh Laqab, Majlis al-Madhabi. So I don't want you to think that there are no, we visit the Jamia, we visit churches. I have lots of friends who do that. We may not do it on a daily basis, but in from what I know, and I know my dad used to bring me to Sidon. Sidon is the city in Lebanon, and there's a lot of Islam Sunni. So we used to go to the mosque, pray with them, and they were surprised by my dad that he was he was reciting the same prayers as them. So,
Thank you for pointing
welcome.
that out, and I really wanted to thank you all for joining us. If there's any other questions left for Dr. Obeid. Thank you so much. Thank you for the Carr Center, and I would like to